If we want to experience true wisdom and insight in this next year, if we want to find uncommon truths that maybe we couldn't find in other places, a good place to start might be to go to the great works of art and literature. I'm talking about the truly masterful works, things like the music of Bach, or Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, or Homer's The Odyssey or the Iliad. These kind of great works reveal truths about human nature and the universe that we live in that you can't find in other places. But did you know that film, movies, can also reach this level of artistry sometimes? A truly great movie can reveal true things about the world that we didn't know right away. And I'm not talking about movies that are just okay. I'm talking about movies that are basically perfect. And some of you might be thinking, well, my taste in movies is subjective anyway. There's no way there's such thing as a perfect movie. Wrong. The perfect movie does indeed exist. And no, I'm not talking about Casablanca. I'm not talking about Citizen Kane or The Godfather. No, the perfect movie was made in 1995 at a particular place and time. And that movie was Disney's A Goofy Movie. About 2 people know what I'm talking about. This movie is so good that it almost physically hurts me to talk to you about it. The entire movie is hilarious. The music is pristine, perfect, everything about it. It is the father-son road trip movie. And if you disagree with me about any movie being better, then you can fight me, okay? Don't fight me, I don't know how to fight. You can fight Champ or Landon or somebody like that. The movie's incredible. Unfortunately, I cannot spend my entire time with you this morning going over the plot points of a Goofy movie, as much as I would like to do it. But there's one scene that I want to bring to your attention. At the beginning of the movie, Max, who is Goofy's son, he's the main character, Max is finishing a school year, and he and all of his friends start to sing a song called After Today. It is a cartoon, after all. So in this song, they sing about how after today, things are going to be better than they are today. Max's friends say, after today, we don't have to do homework anymore. We can go to the mall, play games, live at the pool. Max says, after today, I'm going to talk to Roxanne, the girl he likes. I'm going to talk to Roxanne and not feel like an idiot. And some of y'all are like, that's very relatable. That's something I want to do after today. Even the school bus driver says, after today, I don't have to work anymore. I can sit on my rear and relax. I know every person in this room finds that relatable. Every person in this song was singing about how after today, things are going to be better than today. There's a line in the song. It's powerful stuff. I have to share this with you. Max says this. He says, she looked right through me, and who could blame her? I need a new me, plus some positive proof that I'm not just a goof. Oh, that is so good. Shakespeare himself could not have written it any better. I think we're at a time of year right now. The calendar's rolling over. It's a new year. All of us can relate with that desire to want things to be better after today. We want this year to be better than our last year was. So what if I were to tell you that a magic formula exists, that if you were to follow it, step by step, it would guarantee that this year would be better than last year for you? Would you want that formula? I guess not. Okay, I guess we're done today. Do you want the formula? Okay, I'm gonna give it to you, but not yet. There is a magic formula that I wanna share with you, but there's a few things we have to know before we get into the formula. One, the formula will not guarantee that nothing bad will happen in your life, okay? There are things that will happen beyond your control sometimes that have nothing to do with this magic formula. Number 2, to find the magic formula, you have to know how to listen to the right people. The right people. If you listen to the wrong people for the wrong kinds of advice, then you're going to find yourself in trouble. If you want investing advice, you should listen to Warren Buffett, not to your broke friend who spent all of his life savings on a digital image of a monkey this last year. And I know there's a couple of you in this room who probably did that. That's not the person you want to listen to for finding those things out. If you want to know how to build a church, you should listen to our senior pastor, Dr. Young. I had a professor in seminary named Joel Gregory. He had a big booming voice, Joel Gregory. And he was a great speaker, preacher. And he told me that when he was young and he was pastoring churches, he said this. He didn't know I was from Second, but he mentioned, he said, every time Edwin would open his mouth, I'd pull out a notebook and start taking copious notes. Dr. Gregory was wise. He knew how to listen to the right people. And I'm going to tell you something annoying about my life. My dad apparently played professional baseball. I never saw it. I wasn't alive when it happened. I wouldn't have believed it if there weren't pictures to prove it. I have some of the pictures here. And what's annoying about this, my dad played in the major leagues for about 14 years. And what's annoying for me is that when I grew up, baseball was the sport that I played. And when I played baseball, I didn't have the luxury of doing what most adolescent kids did with their parents, which is to question their authority. So if my dad's giving me advice about my swing, I can't say something to him like, well, what do you know about that? You know? I know, I'm 12 years old, I know how to do my swing. No, my dad knows that. He was a professional baseball player, which is super annoying. But what we're going to read today is in Proverbs chapter 3, and it's from King Solomon, who has credibility to be the person who knows what he's talking about. In fact, before we get to the magic formula, I want to read the first few verses that Solomon says in Proverbs 3, speaking to his son. He tells him this, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man." He tells his son this, I know what I'm talking about. If you listen to me, you're going to be wealthy, you're going to live a long life, you're going to have a good reputation with God and with men. Listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. And Solomon truly was qualified to give us the magic formula to make your life better. He was extremely wealthy, extremely successful. In fact, he was given divine wisdom directly from God, more so than anyone else who lived on the face of the earth. Now, we do need to put aside for a moment the fact that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. That didn't seem particularly wise, but who here has not done something foolish while under the influence of love? Am I right? Anyway, Solomon is qualified. He knows what he's talking about, so we need to listen to him about finding what the magic formula is. Now, I'm about to read the formula to you, and at the beginning, I was thinking about turning this into a mathematical formula and putting it on the board for some of you who might like it, but I realized it's January 1st, and those of you who are in school might mutiny if you saw me try and make you do any math. So instead, we will just read the formula, and then we are going to talk through it piece by piece. Verses 5 and 6 say this, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him," or acknowledge him, "and he will make your paths straight." Solomon gives you a guarantee in these verses. The Lord will straighten the paths of your life if you do the things that are in these verses. Now, does that mean that nothing bad will ever happen to you? We covered this before. No, that's not what it means. But what it does mean is that if you follow the steps to this formula, it will put you closer to being dead in the middle of God's will for your life. So let's look at these things one by one. There's 3 components, he says, that we need to do in this formula for your life to be better this next year. The first one is this, trust. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. A few weeks ago, Pastor Jace gave a sermon talking about faith and trust, and if you'll remember, he had a chair on stage. And what he said is that what it means to believe or to trust means to put your weight onto this chair, assuming that it's going to hold you up. Believing this can hold up the weight of my life that I'm going to put on it. Trusting the Lord means putting the weight of your life on him. Trusting that if you put your life in his hands, that he will protect you. There's a basic belief in Christianity that the big decision you have to make, that am I going to trust God or not? Do I trust and believe that God exists? Do I trust that God knows what he's doing? Specifically, do I trust and know that God knows what he's doing with my life? These are things that we have to do. If you believe these things, if you trust in God through Christ, that's what essentially makes you a Christian. You put your life in his hands. But where things get a little trickier, it's easy on the one hand to say, I trust in the Lord. It's a little more difficult to get in the nitty-gritty parts of life where the rubber meets the road to really say, do I trust the Lord with all my heart, with all my will, in every area of my life? In this chapter 3 of Proverbs, it gives us a few examples of areas that we might need to put our trust in the Lord. One of them is this, do I trust the Lord with my body? In verse 8, Solomon says this, if you follow this formula, this will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. God has given you one body that you get to have for your entire life. It's the only body you're ever going to have. What you do with it is going to affect what happens with your life going into the future. And the Bible actually makes a lot of claims about what you should and should not do with your body, things you should put in your body, things that you should not, ways that you should behave with your body. God has expectations for how you should live with the body he's given you. Do you trust him? Do you trust him? What are you putting in your body? What are you eating? What are you drinking? How are you behaving sexually with the body that God has given you? Are you doing that in line with what God has called you to do or not? It's a fair question. If you trust the Lord, do you trust him with the body that he's given you? Another thing he says is that we should trust the Lord with our wealth. Verses 9 and 10 say this: honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Solomon in the Proverbs actually speaks pretty favorably about the idea of having wealth. Wealth is not spoken about as an evil thing in the Proverbs, which is convenient for Solomon because he was extremely wealthy. But Solomon does speak badly about a few things. He speaks badly about greed. He speaks badly about shady business practices, taking advantage of other people. He speaks badly about not being generous. So when it says honor the Lord with your wealth, if you're sitting here and you're like, well, I don't have any money, so I don't have to do anything, it still applies to you. There's three parts to what Solomon's talking about. One, we have to be diligent with the resources and the energy and the abilities that God has given you to make something of your life and produce things. God expects you to do that. If you don't do that, that's called being lazy. It's called being a sluggard, slothful. So what are you doing with your time and your energy? The next thing is, once you make money, are you going to be wise enough to save it, or are you going to spend it like you're in Congress, meaning spending money that you don't have? Which one of those things are you going to do? And then lastly, once you have accumulated wealth, if you're at that stage of your life, are you generous with it? If you are missing any of these three components, if you're not working hard, if you're not saving, if you're not being generous, then you are not trusting the Lord with your wealth. Do you trust him with the things that he's given you? The last one is this. In verse 21, Solomon says, my son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. Do you trust the Lord with your discernment? God has given you the freedom to make decisions in your life about all sorts of things, about your relationships, about everything that God has put in your path. And the question is, are you listening to the Lord and his guidance and his wisdom when you make decisions? One of the things that a lot of us are tempted to do is to pick and choose which parts of God's wisdom we want to follow. You know what? I'll follow God's wisdom about making money and working hard because that sounds good to me. But the giving part, that doesn't sound too great. I'm not going to do that. Maybe all of God's money ways work, but his sexual ethics that he talks about in the Bible, that's passé. There's no need for me to do that anymore. We try and pick and choose these things, which will lead us to disaster, which leads me to the next part of the equation. Trust the Lord with all your heart, and the next one is subtraction. Do not be a fool. Solomon says, do not lean on your own understanding. Don't be a fool. In verse 7, he says this: do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Don't lean on your own understanding. Does this mean that we should just shut off our brains then? I'll just blindly follow whatever the people at church tell me to do, which that's convenient for me, but maybe not for you. No, you should not turn off your brain. You should use what God has given you, be thoughtful with the things that you are doing. But what it means is, don't trust your own judgment, your own intuition over the knowledge of the Lord. In the book of Judges, it's a very dark period in Israel's history where they kept going into idolatry and wickedness. And one of the descriptors that we get in the book of Judges about what happened is in chapter 17. It says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. When we do what is right in our own eyes, it doesn't matter how smart, how capable you are, how much you think you know. You are just as capable of being deluded and confused by your own heart, by your own sin, as any other person. Jeremiah says it this way: the heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? Who can understand it? Everyone's heart is desperately sick. It is deceptive. It's tricky. It'll lead you to make bad decisions, morally, ethically, logically, everything. The heart is deceptive. I heard a story that I want to share with you. It's about a country, and the country is Iceland. I have a picture of one of the cities in Iceland. It's a beautiful place. Iceland is known for a few things. It's known for fishing, which they've done for thousands of years. It's known for their volcanic activity. There's a lot of energy under the ground in Iceland. And of course, they're also known for Björk. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Does anyone know who Björk is? At 8:15, no one knew who Björk was. She's a weird Icelandic singer. She's really weird. Anyway, Iceland has been an island. It has been an island for a long time, but it's been secluded from most of humanity. And so they were this fishing outfit, is essentially what this nation was. And something really interesting happened in the late 1990s and in the mid-2000s. Iceland decided that they were going to shift their economy from being full of fishermen and people harnessing the energy under the ground to all of them being investment bankers. We are going to borrow a bunch of money from global banks, and we're going to buy assets with it, and we're going to see them go up in value, and nothing is ever going to go wrong, right? That's what Iceland decided. Now, keep in mind, Iceland has about 300,000 people. in their population. The greater Houston area has about 7.1 million people in our population. Stephen looked this up before this service. Wyoming has over 500,000 people living in it. So Iceland is this tiny, tiny country. So what they did is they borrowed money, and they borrowed more money, and they borrowed more money, and they started buying up a bunch of assets. And things looked really great for Iceland around the mid-2000s. Between 2003 and 2006, the average Icelandic family, their net worth increased threefold. They got super rich in this stretch, and they made lots of money, and everything was going great. But did something happen in the late 2000s? Did something happen? Yes, the financial crisis happened. It hit different parts of the globe. It hit the United States with our mortgage-backed securities market. If you want to be smart, tell your friends that. But what eventually happened with Iceland is that everything blew up. It all blew up. They thought that they were making all this money because they were smart. They were making all this money because they were being foolish. If you read some of the things that were happening in Iceland during that stretch, they were convinced that their people group, their culture, their genetics, everything about their country made them better suited to be investment bankers than anyone else in the world. In fact, they were actually doing academic studies at their colleges saying, why is it that we are so awesome at investment banking? And the reality was, they weren't awesome at investment banking. They were being foolish and risky. And what ended up happening is that their economy blew up. Their stock market ended up falling about 95%. That means if you've invested $100, you now have $5. They had no money. And eventually what happened is that their country was responsible for enough debt for over $300,000 for each man, woman, and child in Iceland to owe the rest of the world. It crippled their economy for probably the next couple generations because they were so foolish. Now, are people from Iceland more dumb than people from the rest of the world? No, of course not. But I think what this teaches us is that when things feel like they're going well for us, your heart is going to be deceptive and delude you into thinking that you know what you're doing when you really don't. Do not lean on your own understanding. So if you start by trusting the Lord with all your heart, you don't be a fool, don't lean on your own understanding. The last thing he tells us to do is in all your ways submit to him, in all your ways acknowledge him. Another translation that I really like to read from this is, it said, in all your ways desire his presence. So what does it mean, in all your ways acknowledge him? Is that like at the end of a sporting event, someone wins, they're interviewing him, and he starts by saying, I want to give the credit to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? You know, like after a boxing match when a guy wins, and they're like, what gave you the strength to crack the skull of your opponent? He's like, I'd like to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for doing that. No, it doesn't mean that you send an email in the morning at work successfully, and then you're like, thank you, Jesus, for helping me send that email, making my word so incredible. No, what it really means is being aware of God's presence in everything that you do. Desiring and being aware that he is with you. When you make the little and big decisions of your life, knowing that God cares about what you're doing, that he's watching, and that he wants what's best for you. If you trust in the Lord, if you don't lean on your own knowledge, your own intuition, and you are aware of his presence, desiring his presence, the result is going to be that the Lord will straighten your paths. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be bumps in your life. Of course, things happen. We get sick. We have relationships get broken. We have family members have difficult things happen. That all happens. But I want you to think of it this way. If you really decided to follow the Lord's ways with what to do with your money, with how to take care of your body, with what to do with your marriage, do you think that that would keep you from falling into some of the pits and snares and difficulties that most people fall into in life? Yes, 100%. It absolutely will. If you trust in the Lord, if you don't lean on your own understanding, if you are aware of his presence, your paths will be straightened. Your life will be better. I guarantee it. Now, again, doesn't mean the circumstances of your life will be better, but it means that you will be operating right in the middle of what God wants you to do. If you do these three things, that is the magic formula that will make your life better in this next year. Now, at risk of making you think that maybe I wasted your time for the last few minutes, this whole magic formula, I think, can actually boil down to one word. Even if you don't want to remember those three parts, trust in the Lord, don't lean on your own understanding, acknowledge him, one word encapsulates this whole thing, and it's the word surrender. Now, I could make a joke right now about the fact that if you want to know how to surrender, just go to France, because they immediately surrender in every war they're a part of. But I'm not going to make that joke. But surrender, it means to give up the illusion that you are the one in control. Opening your hand to the Lord and saying, God, this is yours. This is not mine. I'm going to do what you want me to do. I came across a story of a guy. His name is Judson W. Van Deventer. What a name. His parents must have loved him. But Judson was struggling in his life knowing what he wanted to do. He was struggling between going into full-time ministry or wanting to be an artist, and he couldn't figure out what the right thing was to do. And then at the key moment of his life, he made the decision to just surrender all of those things to the Lord. And this is what he said. He said, "For some time, I had struggled between developing my talents in the field of art and going into full-time evangelistic work. At the last, the pivotal hour of my life came, and I surrendered all. A new day was ushered into my life. I became an evangelist and discovered down deep in my soul a talent hitherto unknown to me. God had hidden a song in my heart, and touching a tender chord, he caused me to sing." Judson said that at the moment that he decided to really let every part of his life go to the Lord blessed him with something that he wasn't expecting, something beautiful that he didn't know was there. And the thing that Judson's talking about that the Lord blessed him with was literally a song that Judson wrote, and it's a song that you probably have sung in church before called "I Surrender All." The lyrics say this. It says, "All to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him, in his presence daily live." If you're like me and you grew up in church, you've sung this song hundreds of times. It's a beautiful song. And I don't know if you noticed, in those lyrics that I just read to you, the magic formula was embedded in it. All to Jesus I surrender. I'm not gonna trust in my own intuition. All to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him, trust in the Lord, and in his presence I'll daily live. Trusting in the Lord, not leaning on his own understanding, acknowledging the Lord, living in his presence, surrender. He opened his life and surrendered it to the Lord. And the gift that God gave him was a song that we are singing 150 years later. How incredible would it be for you to do something in your life that makes a dent enough to where it's affecting people, hundreds, thousands, millions of people singing the song you wrote 150 years later? And here's the thing that I want to leave you with today. If you make a habit of your life in 2023 of surrendering to the Lord, every part of your life, not hoarding sections of it over and saying, "This is mine, God. I'll give you this part of my life, but this part of my life is mine." If you're willing to open your hands and surrender to the Lord, who knows what he could take your life and do with you? Who knows what kind of gift he'll give you that you have no idea is coming in this moment? Before he surrendered every part of his life to the Lord, Judson had no idea that God had this song set aside for him. And you don't know what song God has for you either. Now, for some of you, if you have a terrible voice, I don't know if I want to hear your song. But there's something else that God is going to give to you that he is holding back until you surrender it to him. So my one question for each one of you today, instead of thinking, what's the one thing I want to do to lose 10 pounds or do better at work or to do whatever, what is the area of your life that you need to surrender to the Lord right now? Where's the thing that you are holding so tightly with your fist that you just need to let go and surrender it? As we go into this next year, learn to surrender to the Lord, and he'll change your life.